Welcome to the BX Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Fowler, and we have another exceptional guest to share their insights and area of expertise with you on the show. Now, just before we jump into the episode, make sure you tap that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app to get more BX Podcast episodes right there in your pocket. Now, if you would like to find out more about BX and attend a meeting either in person or online, head over to bxnetworking.com/locations. That's bxnetworking.com/locations. Simon is vocal in his message to business owners. He knows that most people start their companies to achieve some type of freedom, whether it's financial, time, or the freedom to set their own rules. Yet, very few achieve this. As a passionate advisor to business owners, he is determined to change this by helping entrepreneurs build valuable businesses and exit on their own terms. Simon has over 20 years' experience in the finance, investment, energy, and technology sectors. He's been an investment advisor to high net worth clients and private companies at one of Australia's largest banks. He holds an MBA with distinction and a diploma in financial markets. He's also a licensed business broker, a registered business valuer, and a member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and the Australian Institute of Business Brokers. Now, more importantly, Simon has started, bought, and exited companies, so he walks in the shoes of business owners. And to us, I presume that's probably one of the most important parts. Now he turns his attention to helping business owners sort through the complexity of family and business life and helps them steer their businesses towards achieving their goals. Simon, it is a pleasure to welcome you to the BX Podcast.
Thanks, Ryan. Really great to be here, mate. And geez, that was a long intro.
It was, but it's worth sharing because you are an absolute expert in this space, and it's worth highlighting that to give our viewers a little bit of background on your accomplishments. But what we're going to get into now is really that personal level. What is it that drives Simon in the work that he does? So let me take you back to your first business. What was the reason that you wanted to start it? What was that level of freedom you were wanting to achieve, or that? Sorry, let me rephrase that.
Yeah.
What was that freedom you were wanting to achieve?
Yeah, it's a funny one. Like if I was to actually look back and say, like, what was my first little kind of enterprising efforts? Like it goes all the way back to when I was a kid. We grew up a pretty sort of, I would say, lower middle class sort of family. You know, we didn't have a lot. We had a roof over our head, but it certainly wasn't our roof. I won't say we were sort of, we always had food on the table, but geez, we did it pretty tough when we were young. And I think as kids, we were always trying to find ways to make a few extra dollars and, be able to do the kind of things you wanted to do. And so I actually, as a kid, discovered that when I could find all the golf balls that all the golfers had hit into all the trenches and into the bay, I could wash them and then go sell them back to the players. And I just still remember doing that the first time, and I came off the golf course with about $10 in hand. And you've got to remember, like this is sort of in the 80s, right? So $10 to an 8 or 9 year old was a lot of money, and and I was just so damn excited. I thought I was king of the world. Like I went and got these balls. It didn't take much effort. I didn't mind doing it, and I got paid. And so it just sort of ignited this little fire in me, and. After that, I would end up doing other things like, buying chocolates and candies and all that sort of stuff and selling them at school. I used to wash cars in the holidays. I used to do all these sort of different things to try to earn a few extra dollars so that, and the funny thing is, I was earning extra money to be able to go and do things, do the things that you wanted to do as a kid. But then as soon as I started earning the money, I realized how much effort I did put in, and then I suddenly didn't want to spend it anymore. And so I'd start hoarding it and going, I'd go into my little room and open my margarine container and count my money every day, probably just to make sure it was still there because my brother wouldn't nick it. But like just became kind of, I guess, enamored with this idea of being able to earn money and being able to then have choices. And look, wouldn't have been able to articulate it back then like that. All I knew is it just felt good. And I guess, fast forward a little bit, I think I went off to a boarding school when I was in high school, and I think that kind of just really reinforced this message for me. And there were a lot of wealthy families there, and I was sponsored to go. I was very, very fortunate. But I think when I looked around that school over a number of years, I realized that there are people out there who have an amazing life, and okay, you're not seeing behind the curtain and all their hardships, but from the things that they're able to do and the sort of decisions that they can make and the options that were available to them, it really sort of engrounded me that there's a better life to be had if you want it. And so that, I think, just doubled down for me. Like I left school, I was doing work in a stockbroking firm. I was once again around money and around these sort of things. And I guess the interesting part of all this journey, Ryan, and I'll get to my very first official business, but I think somewhere along this journey, I went from I started to realize that it's actually not just about having money. It's about what money can do for people in terms of giving them a better life. And that's the message that rings true for me today. That's what we're all about, is helping people understand what's important in their life so that they can use their business as a vehicle to deliver that. So my first business outside of all that, look, I did go off after sort of uni and all those sort of things, and I got into the investment space. You mentioned doing sort of investments for high net worth clients. Did all that. I helped a small investment company start with nothing. They had about $2 million under management. By the time 12 staff. By the time I left, we had 140 staff. We'd raised over $1 billion. We had a $750 million under management. I went on to work at CommBank, and then I built another very large portfolio of investor clients. But once again, working at CommBank was really exciting because my clients were private businesses. And, if I'm really honest, I'm not a big fan of a lot of big corporate cultures. I don't think, like, working at CommBank had a lot of great things, but I didn't feel like I really fit there. But what I was super inspired by was all of my private clients who, once again, had done it. They'd gone out, they'd been successful, they'd built these amazing assets, and they just got to make their own decisions and make their own rules. And yes, we're all bound to certain things and clients and whatever, but they just seemed to have this sense of freedom and happiness that really inspired me. And I realized at that point, like, it really wasn't about just money. It was about freedom. And freedom, look, that means different things to different people, but unless you are set up in the right way and you really understand what's important to you, freedom can be quite elusive. And so I left CommBank in the GFC. I took my redundancy like so many other people, took it quite gladly. And then I went and started a business in the renewable energy space. Radical difference, but both my wife and I, who sat down, and we do all of our businesses together, but we sat down and said, well, what space do we want to be in? What's an area that we believe in that could have a sense of purpose about it, where your work doesn't just feel like work, it feels like something worthwhile, right? And so that led us into that space. We started a company that did energy efficiencies. I trained on top of all my finance training, but we started building a team out. We had about 20 different energy assessors on the team. We ended up buying into another company to roll out a product strategy, built it up a little bit, and then sold out a couple of years later. So that was the kind of real first venture.
Wow, that was such a roller coaster of a ride in such a short space of time. There's so much to unpack there. I just had so many questions popping into my mind as we went along, and the thing that I want to touch on first was the original you as, the first business, the let's say the child entrepreneur, as I think quite a few of us have those early business stories of completely random things that we do, but it all makes money, right?
Yeah.
So when you were that age, earning money, compared to where you are now and the experience you've gone through in between, this question pops into my mind is, what can money do for people in having a better life? Now, there's a few obvious answers here, but in your experience, how much of a role does the finance play once you've got to a level of actually having enough of it to sustain and thrive?
Yeah, it is an interesting question. I'm a big fan of a chap by the name of Dan Pink. If the listeners aren't aware or haven't heard of Dan Pink, do yourself a favor and jump on a Google and just type in Dan Pink, RS Animate is one word, and you'll get one of his talks, and it's animated for 5-year-olds like me who need something visual, rather than just listening. But it's like an 11-minute talk, and he talks about what drives human behavior. And it's a fascinating video, and it changed my life. It's in terms of how I understand myself and other people. And he talks about these studies that were commissioned by, they were done by the biggest, Ivy League universities and all the rest of it in the US, and they were funded by the Treasury Department. But ultimately, it was about saying, the outcome was that money's a motivator. Undoubtedly, money's a motivator, but only to a point. Right? Once people have enough money, where money can be just taken off the table as a major issue. And by major issue, for the average person, it's I can comfortably pay my bills. I can afford my, to go out every now and again. I'm reasonably comfortable without necessarily having to be rich, but I earn enough money to be comfortable. Now, money drops down the list of priorities, right? It literally drops right off. And what Dan talks about is the three primary motivators are autonomy, being able to direct yourself and control your own time and make your own decisions. Mastery is this idea of getting better at something and being able to constantly improve, which really flows into, I love the idea of Kaizen, this continuous improvement. And the third one, and this is a big overrider, is being purpose-driven. Actually feel like you're being a part of something bigger than yourself. So I think, this idea of money and being important and for what it can do for you, I actually think for the most part, it's about giving you choice. I think it's being able to say, no, I don't want to do that job, or I don't want to work with that person. I don't like that person, or I don't like that person's values, or I don't want to work in this place, whatever it might be, and being able to say, well, I don't have to. I'm able to go and do something else. And even if it's just bridging a gap to go and find my next thing, choices to me is the true sense of freedom.
That's really interesting, coming from someone who has gone through that from your experience in the transition for you, because you came from kind of that early childhood, going through boarding school, and then stepping into this financial investment space. In that transition between CBA in the GFC, so many acronyms, to starting this renewable energy company, to me, that sounds very similar to this process of finance versus purpose.
Yeah.
So in that transition, what was the mindset shift for you going through that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I've said this to so many people. It's funny, when you're working in the corporate world, I'll speak for myself. When I was working in the corporate world, I never worried about money, but I really worried about freedom. I hated working for other people not everybody. I had some great people who I worked with, but there are always people that you don't necessarily like or respect that much, and it's frustrating to report to them. And but I never wanted for money, but I wanted for freedom. And then you go into business for yourself and you've got all the freedom in the world, but then you start worrying about money again, And so it's this kind of funny thing you start dealing with. But from my experience, when I started my own business, and I can still say this to this day, I have never worked so hard in my life in terms of the hours and the effort I put into our own businesses. But you do it because it's yours and you're excited about it. And, I'm the type of person that, yeah, sure, I got lots of things I like to do that are fun, that are outside of work. But often when I'm sitting there and, we all have these moments where you go, oh, geez, what should I do next? What am I going to do this afternoon? I've got a few hours. Like, I get excited about working on things in my business. It's just they're things I want to do. And so, I think having that kind of energy and inner drive is a massive differentiator. It's we talk about this even when my clients who are business owners, we often talk about this idea of how do you find the right people and build the right culture in your company where, you're trying to help people act almost like owners. You want them to have that sense of passion. You want them to be willing to put in a little bit of discretionary effort, not because they're being forced to or because, these demands are on them, but because they want to, because they love what they do. And, that's a almost infinitely endless resource, like tapping into human passion and drive. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's exciting when I feel it myself, and I think it's phenomenal when I see it in other people.
And that emotional fuel, that drive, that energy, bringing that for yourself, and I've heard this phrased quite well. My favorite term for it is founder's energy, is your own drive into it. And then you kind of being able to instill that within the team. There's a lot of emotion and a lot of drive around that. Now, part of what you do with people, now I know that we're skipping a very big portion in the middle here, but part of what you do with people is support them in exiting the business once it's built to a level. And you mentioned this before, was the people that you worked with had built assets being businesses. So when you see a business as an asset, it's very logical. When you see the business you've started and you put your founder's energy into it, it's very emotional. Where does that connection come together and play, and how does that emotion play out through the exit process?
Yeah, once again, great question. I think there always seems to be this tension in theories and thinking amongst a lot of entrepreneurs around, well, a business is an asset and it should be unemotional and, et cetera, versus others. And I've had people on my podcast say this, that they don't understand that thinking because to them, business is personal and it's something that you believe in and you're pouring your energy into. And if it's not personal, then you probably will never get over some of the hurdles that require that deeper level of energy, emotion, thinking, pushing, driving, because let's face it, like going into business and running your own show, it can be very, very challenging. I mean, look, if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? So, and we know that most people don't do it. So yeah, look, I think it is an interesting question. I think once again, the answer is kind of, it depends, it depends on the individual. I do think being in business for yourself has to have some of that personal passion and drive. But somewhere along the line, and this kind of aligns a little with what I was saying around Dan Pink, and, once your business achieves a certain level of success where you are able to withdraw what you need from it, you're comfortable, it's got system and process, it's no longer built or running on the back of you and your personal drive and energy, well, then you are able to actually step back from it a little bit and see it more for, well, yes, an asset. An asset's a pretty sterile sort of word. I would say you get to step back a little bit and see the business as its own entity, which is fundamentally what it is, right? Both from an ideological perspective, but also from a legal perspective. A company is its own legal entity. It has the right to sue and be sued. It has all these sort of things. So at some point, I believe that it's really healthy for business owners to be able to step back and see the company as an entity that should survive well beyond their tenure in it. And the sooner that business owners start to see their company like that, rather than, oh, it's my baby and I'm so concerned about every single little decision that gets made in it. Anyone who's got kids will relate to this. I've got two boys, they're 14 and 16, and of course they bloody know it all. But you do see your kids, right? And you go, well, at some point you've just got to let them go and do stuff and experience it themselves, and let them make their mistakes, because fundamentally they're not going to listen to you and avoid all those mistakes just because you told them to. Well, similarly, a company needs to be able to grow beyond its founder, in my view. And I would say that, look, some founders stay for the journey. They're there forever and whatever, and well, for many, many, many years anyway. but very few founders are able to adapt from a startup, a scale up, and then into a very large kind of organization and continue to be that leader effectively, because we all have different personality temperaments. And, most people who are built for that kind of early stage stuff are not great administrators, and vice versa, by the way. So, look, I think it's a really interesting question around that tension. I think business owners should recognize, and this is probably one of the big takeaways I want people to remember from this session, is that we all exit our business one day, right? Whether you like it or not, you're exiting. And so, in my view, it pays both financially and emotionally to give some thought to that, to give it enough respect, because the challenge I see is that too many people start to get a bit sick of it, a bit over it, and then they get ground down over the next however many years until one day some little thing snaps inside them and they go, that's it, I'm done, I've had enough. They ring someone like me and go, Simon, I'm bloody over it. I want out. I'm ready to sell. Can you sell my business? And I kind of look under the hood and go, oh, you've made a decision you're ready to sell, but you are not ready to sell. And then they are back in this conundrum of, oh my goodness, my business is not worth what I thought it was, and I'm not really ready to give it another 2 to 3 years of energy and growing. I'm over it. And all because they just didn't think about this thing and give this last leg of the journey enough thought and enough time and enough respect.
Now, there's a lot that you've just shared there, and we will explore a little bit more coming up about the actual process of what selling the business looks like, a couple of things that need to be ready and prepared for that. But through your experience, I want to bring this back to you for a minute, because through your experience from this renewable energy company to where you are now, along the journey, how have you seen either yourself or business owners that you've worked with run into challenges with letting go, systemizing, processing, automating? Where are those challenges and learnings that you've seen come up?
Wow. Massive question, because there's so many. I'll try to give you a couple. And I see this in myself as well as my clients, right? I mean, I'm in the same situation I'm in because I've had to walk that journey. I think part of the challenge, and let's go right down to small businesses to start with, right? One of the biggest issues with most founders is, when do I hire my first person? And these days it's often even perhaps outsourcing or hiring maybe somebody who's overseas, the Philippines, wherever, to support you in some kind of functional role. And the biggest issue I see with founders of small businesses is that when they delegate a task, that person can't do the task as well as they can. And so they get frustrated by that. And they go, okay, well, I've explained this to them. They should know how to do it. Well, yeah, they maybe they should, or maybe it just takes people time to actually get good at something. And so I actually think that sometimes we have just done some unreasonable expectations. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes people you hire are just not the right fit, and sometimes they're just not doing the work. So that does happen too. But I think if you hire on values and you hire people for the right principles, and, you're willing to trust people and give them a go and allow them to make mistakes, then typically you'll find that those people will actually appreciate that. And, it comes back to you in spades because that person now feels comfortable and trusts you. And so I think the first step really is recognizing that people aren't perfect. And if they're not doing the job properly, it's possibly just as much your training as it is their ability to comprehend, right? So yeah. I think letting go in that respect is, you're hiring people to do jobs not because they're necessarily going to be better than you on day one, but because you believe that they're going to, free you up to do other things yourself that could be higher value. And that's really the first level of thinking for most founders. Once you start to build a team where you've got multiple employees and the business is more financially stable, in my mind, you start hiring people for specific jobs because they are better than you at those roles. And, I don't know who coined this phrase initially, but, it's that old saying of if you look around the room and you're the smartest person in the room, that's a problem, right? Because, especially as a founder or a business leader, because everyone's going to look to you for the answers. I personally don't want that. I want a management team and a group that I can walk in and say, well, tell me what's going on. What's your expert opinion? You're the specialist and leader of that area. I'm happy to make decisions, but I want to be informed by the experts, right? And so I think somewhere in there is a combination, I guess, of our own thinking, our own limiting beliefs. There's financial constraints. There's all sorts of reasons why people, I guess, find it a challenge to move beyond themselves and start to build effective teams. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. There's something else that I want to explore here, and this ties back to what you mentioned before of kind of giving people that extra reason to support the business and give that extra little bit more because they find value in the vision and what you want to create, is allowing them to make mistakes. And how have you seen that play out in building loyalty and building that commitment to business?
Yeah.
Letting people be people.
Yeah, 100%. And look, once again, I think it's about setting the right expectation, both for yourself as well as the employee, right? And it's, look, I'll take a little step back here, because what we're effectively talking about is culture, right? And I guess people can define culture as different things, but, I'm a pretty sort of down-to-earth kind of bloke, I would have thought. And culture to me is defined as the way we do things around here. It's not the values you write on the wall. It's actually how you do stuff and how people interpret that. And, it's funny, I'm constantly saying to my 14 and 16-year-old boys who, carry on like 14 and 16-year-old boys. But when I'm always saying to them when we have a communication breakdown is, I always put the question back to them and say, well, you're saying that I've misunderstood you. Whose job is it to make sure that you're understood in the manner in which you're interpreting or relaying a message? Is it my job to automatically understand you, or is it your job to make sure that I'm understanding you? And of course they get it, because I've told them this 100 times now. But if you're trying to impart a message to an employee, a business partner, a life partner, whoever it is, it's your responsibility to make sure that that person understands the message in the context in which you mean it. All right? I think when you're building teams, that to me is the founding part of culture, right? Is communication and doing this effectively. And it's not to say we all get it right all the time, but it's being open. It's being willing to accept people that they make mistakes. It's being willing to take the time to communicate effectively. And here's the big one, right? It's a really massive takeaway, I think, in life in general, is that humans naturally, in the absence of clear communication, we fill that void with the most negative connotation or perception of a situation that there possibly could exist. We do it naturally. Everybody does it. Worst case scenario, fill the gap, right? And that often, what that does is it makes assumptions about the other person's intentions in any situation. And that to me is really, really dangerous. And I make this mistake myself. I fall into the trap and, I try to pull myself up on it as much as I can. But giving people the benefit of the doubt that they're not evil or bad people trying to screw you over. Like perhaps they've just miscommunicated, and maybe by taking them a moment to ask them questions, give them that benefit of the doubt, you'll actually realize that it's not the situation you thought it was. And it's my belief that by treating people like that you engender a lot of trust and you engender a lot of respect. And when the chips are down and you need extra help, or when things aren't going the way you want and you want that extra effort, people want to see you succeed as much as they want to succeed themselves. And that to me is a culture that is very, very hard to build. It's in fact one of the key things that I see, and I deal with a lot of private equity firms, and when I talk to them about why they're buying certain businesses, often at the top of the list is culture. We can't just add water and make a culture like this over in another company. Like this has been built over time and through variables that are hard to replicate. We want to buy that because that culture is something that delivers a whole different level of performance that is hard to replicate. And that's probably an important connection for business owners. Anyone that's listening is understanding the connection between culture and performance and ultimately financial return and freedom. So
the way that you've just laid out that path is one of the clearest ways of hearing it that I think I've heard so far.
Oh, thank you.
In that, how the people work, how the culture works, how it communicates, and how that ultimately leads to creating a better business is foundationally simple from what you've just shared, which is great. I thoroughly appreciate that, and I know the people listening will appreciate that as well. Once that culture is understood, created, crafted, nurtured, and really cared for throughout the company, what are some of the factors that could then start to pull that apart? Because it's great to have all the positive side, but there is this negative culture that can sometimes creep in. So what are some of those elements that you might have seen play out in the companies you've worked with, or even companies you've owned?
Yeah, look, I think the opposite of everything I've just said is obviously part of the biggest issue. But and I think we've all seen it, right? I mean, I've seen this more in the companies where I've worked for somebody else. It's one of the big drivers as to why I, needed to get out and do my own thing, because I wanted a better environment. I've seen so-called leaders come in and take over, particularly one of the companies I work for, and completely ruined an amazing culture within 3 months. Like literally, when somebody takes over and an entire management team resigns within 4 months, like that's telling you there's a problem, right?
There's something there.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think there are lots of negative reasons that can kill culture, undoubtedly. And I think most of us intuitively know that sort of negative behavior. What might be more useful to share here for your listeners is thinking about how some of the practical things, right? So how do we move beyond this kind of esoteric idea of culture and feeling good and respect and love and caring about people, right? Like that's really important, but how do we put that into a practical vehicle that people can actually drive to go somewhere? And I think people ultimately, let's come back to this idea of purpose and direction and stuff like that. People need a purpose. People need to feel like they're part of something. They need to know what they're doing. They need to feel, like they're getting better, the mastery side of things. Yes, they need autonomy. They need all of those factors. But if you don't have a plan, if you don't have an idea of where you want to go, if you as a founder and a business owner aren't leading people, then often there's a vacuum there. And in that vacuum, people lose direction, right? Now, you want to build your own team of leaders, no doubt. But by the way, following a leader and being a good supportive follower is also a form of leadership, right? Derek Sivers talks about that. He did a 3-minute TED Talk on it. It is one of the funniest and best TED Talks you'll ever see. Where he's got all these ravers at a dance party, and he's like the one guy dancing on his own for an hour before, finally the next person gets up. And he's like, there's the leader, but the first follower is a leader in themselves, right? Because until a couple of other people started dancing with the crazy guy, it wasn't cool, right? Nobody wanted to come on the journey. Let's put it in business terms. You're an early adopter. You're buying the TV that was $40,000, even though the graphics were pretty crap. But you wanted to have the first flat screen TV, right? So you need people who are willing to get on board with the message of the leadership and drive that. And you can't do that unless the leader has a vision, right? And look, I've had business owners, I'm thinking of a particular client of mine who I deeply respect and like a lot, just personally. And he said to me once when we were doing some strategic planning work, 40-something-year-old business, and he goes, Simon, can't we just say we're going to do what we did last year, but a little bit more? and I looked at him and I kind of laughed like I am now, and I went, mate, that is the least inspiring thing I think I've ever heard. Like, nobody is motivated by let's just do what we did last year and a little bit more. And by the way, that little bit more typically goes in your pocket, not theirs. So it's not even a money motivator. Like, we need to have something a bit more of a, doesn't necessarily have to be financial. You've got to have a vision that means something. And it doesn't have to be we're going to the moon and taking over the world. It might just mean that, hey, you know what? We do whatever, insert service or whatever you do, we want to be the absolute best at doing this. We want to deliver customers the best possible outcome. I know at Exit Advisory Group, our real passion is that we understand how sensitive this exit journey is for business owners and how complicated it can be with all the personal and emotional kind of aspects to it. But we want to take people when they come on a journey with us, we want them to come out the other side and go, hey, you know what? Like, it might have been hard and we had our challenges, but man, I feel amazing. I've accomplished something and something I probably didn't think I could even do. And yet here I am. And, I don't want to draw too much of a long bow here, but, it's a bit like when people climb a mountain or do something physical that is extraordinarily challenging, but this enormous sense of accomplishment when they get to the end, right? That took vision. That took inspiration. And somewhere along the lines, that message resonates with other people. And even though it might not have been their passion, they woke up and said, yay, I really want to help this business achieve this vision. They want to turn up and actually feel some sense of, hey, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I like that message, right? Now that's where it starts, right? And then it grows and it fosters through culture and, but yeah. I'm a long talker, Ryan. I apologize. But the takeaway message here for business owners is don't just talk about money, because most people think that the money is just going in your pocket as an owner. Talk about what it is and why it is you do what you do. Simon Sinek is the absolute best at doing this. And for those who don't know Simon Sinek, it's Sinek. Google Simon Sinek TED Talk. His TED Talk, I think it's been seen by 30 or 40 million people now.
It's like the third highest watched in the world or something.
It is phenomenal, right? And he talks about the golden circles and he talks about how to communicate, and that most people talk about the what and then the how and then the why. Well, and by reversing it, talking about your why. Why do we do what we do? If you can craft that message even, because if you're not clear on it right now, sit down and think about it. Or take some time over Christmas when you've out of the work zone, but understand and think about why your company does what it does. What is the reason other than making money? There has to be a reason. And I can tell you the most inspiring reasons that I see, and certainly the ones that have mostly motivated me, are the ones that are actually focused on helping other people. Whatever it is that they're trying to achieve or whatever it is that you fulfill for people, they, in most cases, have some kind of gap in their life for their, what they're doing, and they need you. So put that first and do that really damn well, to the best of your ability, and the money will take care of itself.
Following the vision and the purpose and that really that goal that you want to try and achieve for other people is an incredibly powerful motivator. And you can see that in different companies that, there's some that are just purely out there to drive for profit. That's what we're going to do. And then the others that are out there, they're the ones that you follow. They inspire you. You want to buy their products. You want to buy their services.
Yeah.
Now, while we're on this topic of vision, let's touch on your vision, because you mentioned this in what you do at Exit Advisory Group. But what was that process like of actually formulating that vision and the conversations that you had? Because you mentioned at the top of the episode that you have all your businesses with your wife.
Mm.
So I imagine you've gone through this process together. What was that like? What was that brainstorming like? How did you remove the barriers and just open up your mind and go, what are we going to achieve? Why are we going to be alive? And how can we create that?
Yeah, I think if it comes back to your why, right? That's the basis of every vision. And I'll give you the abridged version. But after we got out of our first business, I went to work for a large US multinational. I ran a division for them here in Australia. Good company, all the rest. But after a few years there, about 3 or so years, I wanted to get out and do my own thing again. My wife Shanti and I sat down and we talked about, well, what do we want to do next? We agreed we wanted to have our own business again. We agreed that we didn't want to do any more startups. Shout out to anyone listening who's done a startup. We all know how bloody hard it is. So, and I've been involved in a few since, but this thinking was, let's go and buy a business because, yes, you have to borrow some money and do whatever, and, you're spending money up front and all that stuff, but you're buying something that works. It has a model. It has a value prop. It has customers. It has systems and processes, and at least to some degree. And our belief was that after a year or so, and you've really learned the business and the industry, then you can put your stamp on it, right? I spent 18 months looking at businesses and dealing with a lot of brokers and other people. And I look, having come out of banking and understanding what I had to do from a compliance perspective to talk to you or anyone about their money and investing, I was really horrified by what I saw with a lot of the brokers I dealt with. I'm not going to say it was everybody. There was a couple that stood out and were very professional, but a lot of them were used car salesmen. And, that's maybe a harsh thing to say, but it was just my experience. And I was really horrified. I'd inquire on a business and I'd get, somebody send me a 2-page unformatted Word document to try to pitch me this business. And I'm like, seriously, is this, and I guess what dawned on me in that process was that for a lot of these business owners, this business was their largest asset. In many cases, it would have been worth more than their home, right? So now, remember, I've got my investment hat on here, and I'm thinking, geez, you've got a portfolio of investments. You're massively overweight in this particular asset might be worth 50, 60, 80% of your net wealth. Oh, my goodness. And now you're trying to sell it and you're being misrepresented. And so I was so shocked by that was really the nexus, the driver for us to start Exit Advisory Group. We just looked at it and went, fundamentally, business owners deserve better. And call me silly, call me a dreamer, whatever, but I actually do fundamentally believe that entrepreneurs are the ones who truly change the world. Entrepreneurs are the ones who actually see things in our environment and our society and go, well, that sucks, or that could be done better, or this is just a damn problem that I'm not willing to put up with anymore. And they actually get off their ass and go and do something about it, right?
Yeah.
You think about what they do, right, in terms of startups. They put themselves at risk. There's opportunity cost. They usually give up whatever else they were doing. They sink money into things, time, energy, effort, all these things. They usually family, fools, friends. They tap people they know. They do all this stuff to try to pull something together to solve a problem. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, where would we be without entrepreneurs? And I guess, look, I have lots of people who like to differentiate between entrepreneurs and business owners, but the fundamental thing is anybody who might be entrepreneurial by nature still has to be a business owner. So somewhere along the line, I guess I think that business owners, they run these companies, they're solving these problems. Yes, some maybe lose focus on their why, but a lot of them don't. And I think they go on these really hard journeys and hopefully they are getting rewarded for all of the effort and risk and things they do. But what invariably happens, Ryan, is that, life's a journey, right? We all agree it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? And I just think if you look at the journey of a business and the owner's journey owning that asset, at some point they start to come to the end of that marathon, right? Their time in that business is coming to a close. And I just think so many of them get to that last 100 meters of the marathon and that's where they trip over and break a bloody leg. And, I don't know, I feel a massive sense of injustice about that. Like they've done what they were meant to do. They delivered, they solved problems, they employed people, they helped others, It's time for them to be able to finish the journey with dignity and getting that final reward they deserve. And so, I've probably meandered off your question here, but I just think for me, my why was to help business owners do this. They're the hero in my story. I'm just here to try to help them with this last bit of the journey so they don't kind of, in a very unjust way, stack it and not get what they need.
That answer was so passionate. And for the people listening on audio, just the reaction and the expression in Simon's face as he's sharing that story, that journey, that process was just incredible to watch. I was super glued to the screen here. And seeing that and hearing it as well just shows how passionate you are about this. And that's what I really love to see come through. And we've briefly mentioned this a couple of times. I would like to really ask this question because I'm sure people listening are going, can Ryan finally please ask this question? What's it like in business with your wife and that process and being able to separate personal life from business life? Because I know that there are a lot of people that are in that, and it's very challenging for many. So tell us about this. What's your experience in this?
It's funny because a lot of my mates, or people I bump into go, "Are you insane? Like, what's wrong with you?" Like, it's no, it's a funny thing. Like my ever since COVID, geez, we all work from home. So my wife and I are in business together. We live together. We work from home together most days. And then, of course, our friends in our local neighbourhood go, "Oh, yeah, we saw you two going for a walk together the other day. You were doing your morning walk or whatever else." It's all built on this really weird premise, Ryan. I actually really like my wife. It's this whole thing, really love spending time with her. I enjoy her company. I'm not going to suggest that we don't ever have disagreements and stuff like that, but I think we don't really argue a lot. I think we're able to talk about an issue, and yeah, sure, we no doubt get frustrated with each other over various different things. But I think Shanti's very good at saying to me, "Get out of my office now. You're irritating me. I've got to get on with some stuff." And I'll go, "Oh yeah, okay. I've gone too far here or there or whatever else." And and similarly too. I mean, I think there are times in a deep relationship like this where one person, Shanti might want to come and talk to me about work, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and I'm in the middle of an unwind, and I have to go, "Hey, time out. Like I know you want to get this off your chest, but I actually really can't talk about this right now. I need a mental break from this," and undoubtedly that's probably irritated her plenty of times as well, right? Because she needed to get something out. And so I think just like everything in life, it's about having expectations. It's about trying to be thoughtful and considerate about the other person. And, me as a stupid husband just accepting that I'm wrong half the time, or, well, 90% of the time, really, let's be honest. So,
I love that answer because my partner and I, for a while, we worked from home, and it was exactly the same thing. I knew when I was wrong, but I'm glad that you said you love and respect your wife just in public. I'm glad that you put that in there at the forefront.
Well, the thing is, Ryan, and you knew you were wrong because your wife told you were wrong, right? So you just
yes,
yeah, we accept it. Okay, I'm just going to go back over here and just sit back in my box.
Yes, I'll go back to my computer over there. That's fine. Now, one last thing to touch on is this is more specific to exit advisory and some of the process of what it's like to go through the process of having a business ready for sale almost. I'm aware that you support people through this process if they need that extra bit of journey and coaching and support in implementation. But tell us about the systemization, the automation, the processes that need to be in place to actually support exiting a business in the right way to finish this 100-meter sprint.
Yeah, great. Another great question. Thank you. So let's take one half step back from just selling for the moment. And I'll reiterate what I was saying before is that we all exit one day, right? Whether we like it or not. So, but exiting means different things to different people. And what I find is the most common experience with business owners is that they're trudging along, they're doing their thing, perhaps achieve some amazing success, perhaps having challenges, whatever it might be. But when they start thinking about getting out, it can be quite confusing about what option makes the most sense to them. And, at one end of the scale, you've got just sell the entire business to a third party and get out completely, which means that you're exiting the management of the company, of course, but you're also exiting the ownership of the company. At the other end of the scale, you've got people who perhaps want to exit the management of the company, but not necessarily exit the ownership of the business. Perhaps the business has some history to it, some family ties. Maybe you took over it from your parents, or, maybe you've got kids coming through that you think maybe some of them might want to, or one of them might want to take over one day. And there's a sense of nostalgia around the business. So sometimes selling is not the only or not the right option for business owners. What I sort of advocate for them is to go through a process here of considering these different options. And it comes back to this magic word that we sort of touched on at the beginning of the episode here is choice, right? Having choice and understanding first what those choices are. And then, like anything in life, when you need to start making choices, is you go through a bit of a process of elimination, right? You start to take the choices off the table that are less appealing or less palatable to you, until you're left down with the core ones that make the most sense. And what I will say there is that, like everything else in life, no choice is perfect, right? Like, no choice is perfect. There is a cost to everything. And so, sometimes selling, you might feel a little bit of a sense of loss around something, was your baby, or, bit of that nostalgia again. Sometimes hanging on to the asset has its dramas as well, because A, you can get sucked back into the business, when you don't want to be. B, I actually had a client once who said, my accountants told me I'd be an idiot to sell this company because it's a cash cow, it just makes good money, and it's just crazy. And then when we talked about it, that business represented about 70% of his net wealth. And I said, okay, you're telling me about John, the manager, coming through and how much you like him and how good he is at his job. How comfortable are you taking 70% of your net wealth and handing it to John to manage for the rest of your life? And I just watched this client blanch and turn white. And he realized, I can't do that. That's just insane to have so much exposure to one asset. And also, hey, I like John and he's great at his job, but do I trust him that much? Yeah. Hey, and once again, let's touch on this topic of freedom, right? All of a sudden, I'm putting my freedom in your hands. Now, that's scary. You are no longer the driver of that bus. And so I think layer all of those complex choices with things like family and other emotional things, and the employees you've developed relationships with, and potentially other business partners. And, there's this, even suppliers and customer relationships, right? Like, there's this complex, what I often say is like a bowl of spaghetti, right? You're kind of trying to find something, and you've got to sort of unpick the strands until you understand, and you can lay them out a little bit and understand, well, hey, if we pull this lever to get that result, what are the other unintended consequences that might come out of these decisions we make? And so I just think business owners need to go through, and this is not something you want to rush, right? Nothing worse than having to make decisions under pressure all the time. You want the time to think through some of these things so that you can start to evolve what you believe is the best of those choices. Now, look, if the best of those choices means selling, and selling might mean sell all of it, sell part of it, sell over time in chunks. There's 1,000 different ways we can sell a business. But if selling is the right option, great. Certainly we help people with that. We actually run transactions. It's a big part of our business, is selling companies, and whether you're selling businesses, the business assets or the shares and whatever, there's lots of ways of doing that too. But it's a journey. And selling a business, I always say to my clients, you need to allow for 12 months in your mind that it could take that long. There's a prep phase. There's a period where we're out engaging buyers and generating the right level of interest. And then hopefully you get the right offers. Then you're going into due diligence. You're negotiating final contracts. It can be very tough. It can be emotional. There's nothing like a random buyer coming in and basically telling you you've got an ugly child. It can be really, I've seen some of my clients get super offended by the comments that buyers make. And I'm like, you need to calm down. Like, this is just part of the dance, right? Like, but look, back to your comment about process and automation. Look, I'm a big believer in process and systems and automation where it makes sense. I know for us, and look, a lot of advisors are different, but we use project management tools. We use various CRMs to track relationships and conversations. We've got lots of automations. We use different channels to find buyers. We map markets. We go outbound. We do cross-border transactions. I've sold companies to people in Ireland and the US and into Asia. And, if the right buyer for your business is based in another country, then you need a thoroughly robust process to uncover who they are, engage them, and put them through some kind of a process that can get you an outcome. And here's one thing that another, I guess, key takeaway I think your listeners really should keep in mind if they want to sell one day. It is one of the greatest traps that I see so many business owners falling into, and that is that you're running a great business, and then somebody gives you the old proverbial tap on the shoulder, hey, Ryan, you've got a fabulous looking business here. And typically, by the way, Ryan, you would know this person somewhere. You might have seen them around. You might not know them personally. Maybe they're a competitor. Maybe they're a supplier, whatever it is. But you kind of might even know who they are. It's not a requirement, but it often happens. And we say, hey, Ryan, you've got a fabulous business. Mate, we've been watching for a little while. Look, we like what we see. And would you be open to selling your business to us? And Ryan, the first thing that happens, and sorry for those that are only watching audio, is they get this massive head expansion. It feels pretty good to be wanted. People want to buy my business. I must be doing something pretty awesome. We can't help it, right? We're human. And it is nice to be wanted. And when people are talking money, it makes you feel pretty good, right? The problem with that is that your blinkers suddenly go on. And what I see that is business owners go down the path often talking to this individual buyer, and they often get put through this process that takes 6, 9, even 12 months, where they have now exposed themselves, given over every little bit of micro detail of their business to this buyer. And then what happens a lot of the time is that buyer now knows you are so wedded to this outcome. You've already been spending the money for the last 6 months in your mind, and they either lowball you, hoping that you'll basically just take the offer. Or often what happens is they actually pull out because they've had some change of strategy or something's gone on, or we get a global financial crisis or a bloody pandemic or whatever might happen. Conditions change and they pull out of the deal. And business owners just feel absolutely gutted, distraught, stripped bare because they've given so much personal and private information over. Some of it quite competitive information, so they might have exposed themselves to new competitive risks. And what I always say to the business owners who come to me having been through that is you've basically been put through a buyer's process rather than you formulating your own process and putting buyers through it. Now, if you don't put buyers through a thorough and robust process, you will never get the outcomes you want because somebody else is driving the bus, right? Their process is designed to get them the outcome they want, not you. And so if you are going to entertain discussions with one buyer, why on earth would you not engage other buyers? Why on earth, you're going to have to pull all this information together for due diligence anyway. So why wouldn't you just take one step back and say, okay, this is nice. This is interesting. How do I now, like I would in any other situation in business, how do I construct a scenario here where I'm more in control and I can more likely get the kind of outcomes I want? It sounds really obvious and logical when I say that, but people get so caught up in the emotion of getting the tap on the shoulder that they completely forget all this stuff and they just go barreling down the rabbit hole. And look, I'm not saying it never works out and people never get a sale that way. They do, but the risks just go through the roof for you.
Yeah.
So
it's a real drama hook.
Massively, right? And
they're just caught and reeled in.
Yeah. And by the way, what I just gave you then, that example about people using and dragging you out and then lowballing you. Like when I was traveling once and dealing with a lot of other advisors, I was in a group of people who were having a beer and I said, well, look, this is what I see happening a lot. And one of the guys in the group who actually did M&A for large corporates, he just laughed and goes, mate, that's corporate M&A 101. Like he was actually bragging that he does that intentionally to business owners to get what he wants. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe you actually bragged about being a douchebag. But you pretty much said you emotionally manipulate people for money.
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe it. And I thought, okay, well, you really just underscored why business owners deserve better. They deserve somebody in their corner who understands where the tricks and the traps are, who's going to defend them, who's going to fight for them, and not let that kind of bullshit, creep up and take them by surprise. And yeah, mate, selling businesses, people think it's like selling a home. Oh, yeah, we'll do an open house and somebody will come in and go, I just love the kitchen and bathroom and it's so close to those schools. Let's just pay the extra money. Like, no. It never happens, right?
It's not going to work.
Yeah. Selling businesses is complex and there's so many reasons why a deal can fall over. And business owners, the buyers are typically very smart people, surrounded by even smarter people. They're accountants, they're lawyers, they're whatevers. And they have an entire team that is designed and well-trained to play this game. So I don't know. Me personally, I would much rather go in with my own team. I'd much rather know that I've got people who can cover off the key risk factors. Nobody plays a game of cricket or volleyball on their own. You need a team, right? You want to win, You've got to get people around you who are good at what they do, and collectively you solve problems because you all look at it from different angles and you come up with the right solutions. And that is what business sales is all about.
That's an incredible insight, and it really brings up this kind of saying that I've got in my own head that rolls around every now and then is, the people I want around me are the people that are on my side. They're the ones that are going to work with me. They're going to be collaborative. We're going to literally create the best outcome because they want to support my best outcome.
Yeah.
And you articulated it perfectly through that whole mindset journey and exploration. That was a huge bit of sharing there. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
We are kind of at the end of our episode now, so I would like to get you to just share a little bit more about Exit Advisory.
Yes, we'll do.
Find you and finish off.
I've
got one last thought.
I'll add one comment just to that thing about having the team around you, and I totally agree. But having a team around you is also not about surrounding yourself with people who just say yes all the time, right? Having your best interests at heart also means having the courage to say to you, Ryan, I disagree with you. This is an important issue and I'm seeing it really differently. And I know that you're passionate about this, but, and once again, like I'm always saying to my boys, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? And good people can have discourse and it can be celebrated by the fact that you approach that in the right manner and you're willing to speak to people in the right way. So don't just surround yourself with people who say yes to you all the time. Surround yourself with people who challenge your thinking and see problems in a different way. So yeah, anyway. Exit Advisory. Yes, please. We're at exitadvisory.com.au. We do have a business scorecard that people can actually access. Perhaps I can put a link to that in the notes, Ryan. But
we'll drop that down below.
Yeah, go into exitadvisory.com.au. Hit me up on LinkedIn if you're hearing this. Like, reach out to me on LinkedIn and with a connection, and just put a little note in there saying you heard the interview on the BX podcast. I get a lot of invites. I get a lot of people trying to flog me stuff. So I typically, if you send me a little message saying you heard this podcast, I'd love to connect with you. I'm very happy to answer questions. A lot of people ask to jump on and have a little virtual coffee because they've just got a burning kind of question in their mind. I'm happy to do that stuff. This is a long journey, right? Like we said, it's a marathon, and sometimes people just need a little check-in without being flogged a widget or flogged some service. Like, we're not about that. Like I said, we all exit one day, right? So, at some point in the journey, I recognize as a company that people typically need some help, and we're just happy to help along the way. And if you need something more formal, then great, we talk about it, right? But you're certainly not going to get a big pitch fest from us. Yeah, they're probably the best places to reach out to me. Always happy to chat, and I love business owners, so we're here to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Simon. We're going to drop links to all of that in the show notes as well, so people listening or watching can track this down and find out more about you, connect, and jump on LinkedIn with you as well. So thank you for that offer. It's been a pleasure to have you on the BX podcast. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and really appreciate your insights that you've shared with all of our viewers and listeners.
Well, thanks, Ryan. It's been a pleasure being here. Really enjoyed chatting.
That wraps it up for today's episode of the BX podcast. You can get more of the show by simply tapping the follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. To join us at a live and in-person or online event, head over to bxnetworking.com/locations. That's bxnetworking.com/locations to find a meeting near you. We look forward to talking to you next time on the BX Podcast.